Hello, this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride, and today we're looking at a first submission by Stephanie of her horse Flynn. Flynn is a 5-year-old half-quarter horse, half Arab. She's only owned him for about 2.5 weeks, she says here, and she said that he has had previous to her about 2.5 months of training with a reining trainer. We can see that his top line is not very well developed, obviously, as we wouldn't expect a horse this green. Not too bad. There's a bit of a hole there behind the saddle that will fill up with training, so we want to get him working over his back so that happens. You can see as he comes around straight there how there's kind of a dip behind the saddle and how it kind of dips down and then up to the top of the hip bone there. So that tells us he's never been really developed over his back very much, but we wouldn't expect him to have been able to develop much in that period of time that he's had in training. Not a bad trot starting off. I liked how he was accepting the contact there a little bit and stretching into it in the walk. That was pretty good. I'd like to see him stretching a little deeper in that walk before we start the trot, but if at this stage of the game I wouldn't expect more than this. You're doing a good job of keeping him out at the end of the line there, and that's about the right length of the side reins there for him. That is, he can't get his head all the way up, but yet at the same time we're not tying his head down, which in a little bit of time he should take contact and begin to stretch over that top line. Now I want you to notice how he's trotting there and look very closely when we lunge. We always want to try to get both ends of the horses on the same circle, so to speak. And you can see that he's just counter-flexing a little bit to the outside as he comes around there. So always be sure that your side reins are the same length, just so we're no confusion about that. I run into people who've been told to tighten the inside side rein, and that is not what you want. That actually just teaches a horse to hang on the inside rein. But there he goes, stretching into a good stretch there. That's not bad at all. Obviously we want him to stay there ultimately, but for the short time you've been working him, this is really quite good. You can see he gets a little bit behind the leg. I'd want to send him on a little more actively there, and that seems to be what you're doing. I like how you're keeping him at the end of the line. That's very good. Just be sure there's no obstacles in your way. And we want to just keep him in the stretch. That's not a bad trot until he just accepts a little more contact and goes into the stretch just like that. That's exactly what we're looking for right there. So when we get to the point where we can keep that, he will stay there and begin to develop. This is a good stretch he's starting to do here. So I think you're off to a very good start here. I'm not seeing anything I have a problem with. It's actually quite a nice mover, and it will move even better as you get him to swing a little deeper under his body. And you can see when he pulls his head up how the underside of the neck becomes rather ewe-necked, and that tells us that the horse is pulling a little bit with his shoulders there. Remember, when you see a horse that's very developed on the underside of the neck, it basically tells you they've been pulling with their shoulders instead of lifting and carrying you forward with their hindquarters. But once again, with this horse as little work as this one has had, 2.5 months is certainly not enough to do much more than just sort of get him started on the lunge line. There he goes into that stretch. That's really good. So your side reins are adjusted correctly, and this is about the right tempo for him. Just every time you see his head comes up, just send him a little more forward. Now, he certainly could be stepping underneath his body a little bit more, and he will in time, I'm sure. Now, remember when you're lunging that you want both ends of the horse to be on the same track. So sometimes he kind of counter flexes and kind of swings his hindquarters into you. See how he comes around the corner there? His shoulders are a little bit outside of the circle that his hindquarters are on. So maybe work him a little closer to you at times, but try to push the hindquarters away. But basically what I'm seeing here is very good. He's starting to accept contact and stretch you, and it needs to be a little more consistent, but that's not bad at all. I think it probably would be better once you really get him going here to maybe get that barrel out of your way there so you can lunge right in the center of the arena. Now, with a horse at this level, you wouldn't want to do a whole lot of cantering. If you do just a circle or two around, then bring him back to a trot. His canter's not terrible. There he gets stretched into a little bit, so that's pretty good. That's better. So our rule of thumb is if the horse can't get over his back in the canter, there's really not much point in doing it because they only just end up kind of sore in the back and the front legs if they don't come through behind. But, you know, he had some moments, and that was about right. You know, just not a lot of canter, a couple of circles around and bring him back, and that's perfectly fine. But I would wait certainly until to do it again until you get him really stretched down in the trot, and that's looking really even. As I said, I would get that pole and barrel there out of your way so you can be in a more consistent circle, you know, and maybe not drive him into that corner so much, which seems to always tends to counter flex a little bit when you do that. So kind of stay off your rail a little bit. So, you know, unless you really need the rail to keep him going, which we do with some young horses, but I don't think you need that with this one. Just clear out the center of your arena there so you're not having to force him into that corner quite so much or be, as he was just there, disrupted by the barrel being in the way. So what we want to do now is just really settle this trot before we go back into the canter, if you do at all. Not bad. Now, I would have liked to have seen him just get a little more settled in the trot before you change directions. I'd like to see him have just settled down and stretched into the contact and stayed there a little more. I'm always looking for the horse, I always say, to get in the zone, where they get in that place where, they're going around the circle, they're stretching into the contact, the ears become floppy and relaxed. They just sort of get into the work, so to speak, and stop resisting. He was still kind of going up and down a little bit. So I would have spent a little more time lunging in that direction until I got him a little more settled in before I changed directions. Always a good idea. But once again, I'm not seeing anything glaringly terrible here. In fact, it's quite good. For only having the horse the short period of time that you have, I think this is really quite good. So again, here now, try to keep your slack out of the lines. And once again, that barrel is just a little bit in your way. So clear your ring next time. Give yourself a little more room so you can lunge more in the center, so you don't have to keep sending him into that corner as you were doing in the opposite direction. But this is good. He's starting to stretch into the contact here quite nicely. That's not a bad trot for him there. His hind legs are coming a little deeper into the body. And once again, you want to keep that slack out of the arena there. Out of your rein there. So when he falls in, just send him back out again. Now this canter here is pretty hollow. Once again, I would have brought him back. I think he needs to settle in the trot more before you do much cantering. This is pretty hollow here. His head's up and he's just kind of pulling along with the shoulders. So I would have brought him back already, but good. At least you didn't go on there too long. Once again, try to get him out in your circle. Take that slack out of your rein, so you keep the slack out when you're lunging. That's our goal. It's just like riding. We want to get to the point where we can keep an unbroken line to the horse's mouth and keep consistent contact. And we want to do that same thing when we lunge. Because we want, basically, lunging is just riding from the ground once we understand it. You have a rein in your hand, and since you have side reins on, it's like two reins, because if the horse bends to the inside, he will bend into the outside rein. That is, when a horse is going correctly, and the side reins are adjusted correctly, and they are even on both sides, when the horse bends, the inside side rein will be loose. And once again, that's why we never want to tighten the inside side rein, as some people do, thinking they're creating bend, but all they really do is get the horse hanging on the inside rein when you do that. So when the horse bends, the inside rein will be loose. Once again, this is too much canter. He's counter-cantering here, or cross-cantering rather, and that's just not going to do him much good. So I'd like to see you just settle him in the trot. I think he's at a phase where I wouldn't do a whole lot of cantering with him, because he just isn't strong enough there to do a great canter. This is all pretty hollow, and this wouldn't really help you much here. So I would bring him back and just work on your trot work a little more. And once again, it's not bad. Go into the canter, but you've already circled here too many times with him hollow. So once or twice around, in the canter, if you want to do it to energize him a little bit, though he's getting a little better there. But he just doesn't look strong enough to me to do a whole lot of cantering yet and stay over his back. That's not to say that the horse can't canter, but he can't canter correctly. So there's not a whole lot of use in doing things badly. And now he's back to cross cantering again, kicking out. So less canter work here. And now he's just kind of throwing himself around the circle. He's still cross cantering. So that didn't do you a whole lot of good. And you can really soar a horse up. A lot of veterinarians these days tell people not to lunge horses because, you can really, if you don't know what you're doing, you can really soar them up. So very little cantering until the horse really gets over his back. You want to try the canter every few days, good. But only do it for a couple of circles. And when they're cross-cantering and that sort of thing like he was doing, just bring them back. What that is a sign of weakness. The horse just isn't strong enough to carry himself over his back on that smaller circle, so he's just kind of throwing himself all over the place. Remember that trotting builds muscle. Cantering tends to build wind. So if a horse doesn't have a good canter, we don't canter. We trot to build the muscle. And then you'll find that in a short period of time, the canter will get better. Whereas if you canter a horse hollow, all that's going to happen is he's going to get sore in the back and sore in the front feet, So just don't do a lot of that. His trot work is pretty good. He just needs to settle into it a lot better. So again, here to send him out away from you a little bit more. And remember, you're spending a lot of time cracking and cracking that whip, but you're never touching him with it. And after a while, that just doesn't do anything. So, once in a while, you need to shorten your rein and get close enough to him that you can actually place the whip on him so that he knows that it means something. Because if you just keep cracking it and cracking it against the ground the way you're doing here, most horses will just kind of forget about it. And once again, this is too much cantering. It's too hollow in this canter, so this isn't really doing you any good. So just bring him back to a trot and work in the trot. As I said, once or twice around is about it. But we don't want to chase the horse the way you're doing here. That just doesn't really help anything. We just want to bring him back to the trot. if you need to, work a little closer to him, and we need to get those hindquarters to swing to the outside. Even here in the canter, as you can see, the shoulders are pulled outside the circle. So we want to get both ends of the horse on the same circle, kind of our goal. Now, there's kind of like lateral movement. What does that do? When we get both ends of the horse on the same circle, then he's going to be stepping deeper under the body. And you see how you're now, because you haven't tapped him with it, you're now having to beat the ground kind of a lot to get him going. Though he comes back, and this is not a bad trot. It's getting a little better there. Could be a little more active. So shorten your reins and walk a little more with him. And as I said, once in a while, you need to tap him with the whip. Now, that's a good stretch there. That's coming better. That's more what we want. Only want him to keep him there. So as I said, once again, you need to get close enough to tap him, because at this point, you've used the whip so many times and he's not even paying attention to it anymore. So that's why we have to get close enough. I tell everyone, when they're starting to learn how to lunge horses, you need to take your whip out in your ring when the horse is not there, and practice being able to use it at a target. For instance, pick a fence post and try to hit it over and over again. We're not trying to beat the horse with the whip, but we have to be able to place it on him once again, just like with your leg. Because if you never touch with your leg, the horse is not going to respond to it. How does he know? So we need to tap him once in a while like he is here, so he's not just ignoring your whip. You might find that you need a longer whip if that's possible. I always lunge with the longest whips I can find so that I don't have to bring the horse too close to me in order to keep him moving. So once again, just a little more active, and that would be a lot more active if, once again, you would touch him with the whip. And the place to touch the horse with the whip, and once again, if you need a reminder, go back and watch my video on lunging. But you want to touch him in that fleshy area. There's only 3 places we ever touch a horse, and that's on the side, just where your leg would be, and in that fleshy area above the hocks there. And then sometimes we tap them on the shoulder if they're flipping around on us, but that's an advanced thing to do. So as you see here, he's completely forgotten about it, and you're just beating and beating the whip, and he's going, I'm not responding. So at that point, you need to get close enough to him and give him that tap with the whip, because as far as he's concerned at this point, the whip doesn't mean anything because it's never tapped him. So like anything else, you can shoot off a gun next to a horse, and yeah, they might spook the first few times, but after a while, they'll get used to it. That's kind of like with the cracking of the whip. If you don't ever touch him with it, they're never going to care. So we need to practice with that whip a little bit, get a little better at placing it on the horse. Because once again, just like in the other direction, we would have liked to have gotten, he never really got to a place where he just settled in. And mostly that's because he's ignoring you, because, as I said, it would be like riding and never touching him with the legs. He's not going to keep going. But I do see a lot of potential here. I think when you get him over his back, the few glimpses that I got of it, when he did stretch, he looked quite nice, and you could see his hocks working better and all of that. So your lunge work just needs to be improved a little bit. Once again, practice with your whip, and then once again, if you've cracked your whip 3 times or twice even, and nothing has happened, you need to get close enough to him that you can tap him with the whip so he will remember what it means. And once again, try to push the hindquarters out on the circle so he yields to you. So a horse that's keeping his hindquarters inside the circle when you're lunging is doing 2 things. He's basically arming his guns against you, meaning his back legs, which is what horses do to each other when they want to warn each other. They point their hindquarters at each other and go, come near me and I'll kick your brains out. Well, that's kind of what a horse is doing on the lunge line, that's trying to push his hindquarters at you. So it's very important to training that the horse yield away from the whip, just like it's important that he ultimately yield away from your leg once you start riding. This walk here, though, is not bad once you've gotten on. It could be stretched a little deeper, but it's not bad. It needs to be quite a bit more active, but it's not terrible. It has a ways to go, but it is really not too bad at all. We just need to make it a little more active now. And that's what I kind of feel like with this horse. The few moments you've gotten him right and really got him ahead of your whip on the lunge line, you had a few moments of stretching, but then he just sort of started ignoring you. And once again, once they start ignoring your leg, there's not much riding we're able to do. And when I say leg about lunging, I'm talking about the whip. So he pretty much started ignoring you, and then you sort of gave in. So you never really got there. Not a bad walk here, just needs to swing a little more actively. Of course, we'd like him to stretch a little more, but once again, the stretch is not going to happen if you don't have him active. So he needs just a little more walk. That's not bad there. It's just a little bit pokey. So the first thing we need to worry about before anything else is just that the horse will move actively. So before we can worry about getting the horse over his back, he has to be coming through from behind and have to move forward from a light touch of your leg or your whip, as the case may be. But this is not bad. He's stretching into it. That's not bad. The neck is pretty good there. Could stretch on down, but it's just too inactive. So we just need to get what you're getting. And I think when you get him a little more active off your leg, and once again, this will start with the correct lunge line work. When you get him working more correctly on the lunge line, and not just ignoring you as he was there, because it just sort of got worse as you went on with the lunge line. The more you snapped the whip, the more he ignored you, and then we ended up not in the place that we wanted to be at the end of the lunging work, which is the horse stretching into the contact in a nice, supple, and rhythmic trot. So once again, your walk here is not bad. It's just too slow. It needs to be a little more active, opening up. This is a little better as you come here. And he doesn't look particularly resistive to any of this. It just looks like he needs to be a little more active off your leg. As far as your position goes, I don't see anything particularly wrong with it. Looks like you have a pretty good posture. Toes are lifted, your heels are down. All of that looks good. There you go. That's a better walk there, stretching into that. I mean, for only having had this horse for a couple of weeks and as little training as he's had, you're doing a very nice job with him. I have really no problem with any of this. I'm just pointing out some things to help you move a little bit more actively forward in your training, which means making him more actively forward in your gaits and away from your leg and whip, as the case may be, on the lunge line. But this is not bad. Starting to swing a little bit more here as he's going on. Like to see him stretching, another foot or two deeper there. And stretch out and really stretch the base of the neck. So it's so important that we can find the full length of the horse's neck. So many people today, think that riding is pulling the neck back at them. And when you pull the neck back into the body, what do you think that does to the rest of the body? It stops it from moving. It's also why we see so many horses that are so agitated today and pissed off, especially in so-called dressage, where people are pulling and pushing at the same time and trying to create collection by basically shortening the horse and pulling its neck back at them. That's not how collection, which once again, the correct definition of collection is once the horse is working over its top line, its ability to bend the three joints of the hind leg and maintain that lowered position. But it also means that the horse has gone through the change that their bodies go through, with correct basic training, which means the withers has pulled up through the shoulders and the horse has a more uphill appearance, which allows the hindquarters to come underneath. And that's a process that takes about 2 years, with the best of riders, because horses can only develop so fast. It's like a young person. Yes, we want them to develop, but they grow at the speed that they grow at, and they develop muscles at the speed that they develop at. So it's difficult to, if we just do everything right every day, we find pretty much they're moving forward and you'll find that they'll improve. But this is not a bad trot. It's starting to stretch a little bit here. It's not quite all the way down there. You're having moments and glimpses of that you're really getting there. He needs just to swing through a little bit more actively. It's just still a little bit too slow. And see how his hindquarters are kind of, he's kind of mincing along behind. This horse could have a much bigger stride. I think this horse will be quite a good mover once you get him in the right position. I like how you're keeping your turns in circles to large circles and large turns. You're not doing anything out of order, so to speak. I see so many people, and they go along pretty good, then all of a sudden they're trying to do 8-meter circles with their green horse. It doesn't work that way. You've got to only do movements that the horse can maintain the rhythm. Once again, remember that the rhythm and the engagement is what guides our training. So if the horse isn't coming through and over its back, we've got to get that before we get anything else. So once again, I feel like you could just maybe perhaps carrying a dressage whip might help you a little bit just to get him a little more active off your leg. He's just not quite giving you what he can give you. I would say we need another 20% increase in that swing and activity just to get him moving. But that's not bad. I mean, he's about halfway there. And once again, as I said, for 2.5 weeks that you've had the horse, I think you're doing a very good job. We just need to get him to stretch a little deeper. So as he comes around there, you can see the bottom side of the neck, how it kind of tensed for a minute. So that tells you he starts to pull a little bit. So while not terribly hollow, this horse, he's not very well developed, but of course, how could he be with a short period of time? But what you're doing here is really pretty good. It just needs to be a little bit more active. You just need to send him a little bit more active. You see how he comes to the corner, it kind of slows down there a little bit, and he kind of loses his back end for a minute. So we just need to get a bigger swing. Once again, I love how you're keeping these big active circles. That's good. You're not trying to do anything that's impossible for him. And actually, it's coming pretty nicely. There's a little better trot there as it comes through there. Remember, every time that head comes up, just send them forward. So just like the lunge line, we just need to get everything a little bit more active. But you are almost there. And once again, I'm not seeing anything glaring. Your hands are following nicely. Your position is quite nice. Nothing wrong there. Now watch as the horse stretches down, though. You're tending to fall over with him right now. You're letting your shoulders drop, and that's what we don't want to do. So as he drops down and stretches into the contact, we have to stretch up and back, because if we fall over forward, it's going to push the horse on the hindquarters. Just like walking on top of a ball. Remember, it's a ball that we're trying to create here. We're trying to get the horse round over the whole length of its body. So if you suddenly shift your weight forward, it's going to put him on the forehand. But once again, that's not bad. Just try to straighten up a little bit and don't let your shoulders go as you're letting them go there. You're kind of rounding forward. Keep your shoulder blades flattened into your back. But, you know, for having a horse for 2.5 weeks, you're really doing a nice job with him. He looks like he has a lot of potential. It doesn't look like he had any glaring problems. That is, you know, he's not a lunatic or anything like that. I mean, it looks like he's got a pretty good start on him. Just get him working a little more actively and over his back. He's not quite there yet. You're having glimpses of it. But I think you're going to get there really, really well. Once again, this is too slow. You see how it's kind of poking along. So we just, once you get that swing, ask for a little more and just don't drop your shoulders forward. So again, this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride. Great working with Stephanie and Flynn this morning. I look forward to seeing your next video and seeing some improvement in this. So once again, remember, keep him out in the circles, a little more active, touch him with the whip, and just get your trot work a little more active.